Open the back panel of any AV receiver and look at the HDMI board first. That one circuit board is where 5 of these 7 brands eventually failed their customers. 5 AV receiver brands robbing you blind. 2 that actually earn what they charge. No sponsored gear. No manufacturer relationships. Just what the technicians know. Onkyo. Onkyo built a genuine reputation for mid-market amplification from its founding in Osaka in 1946. The TX series receivers from the 1970s and 1980s are still on technicians' benches for routine maintenance today, not because they are failing, but because they are still being used decades later. That is what honest engineering looks like when it survives the company that built it. Then came the HDMI board. Between roughly 2013 and 2019, Onkyo used an HDMI switching board design across multiple receiver generations, including the TXNR626, the TXNR636, the TXNR727, and the TXNR818 that failed under sustained thermal load. Repair technicians document this constantly. The failure traces to solder joints on the board's ball grid array chips fatiguing under heat, and the standard fix is either reflowing those joints or adding a cooling fan the receiver never came with. This pattern is well documented across independent repair channels, not a one-off complaint. The amplification section keeps working. The HDMI board, which handles every video and audio signal a modern receiver needs to pass through, does not, and without it, the unit becomes an expensive 2-channel amplifier with no inputs that matter. Prices mentioned are US-based estimates. Check your local market. Onkyo's home audio business went bankrupt in 2022. What remains today operates under Premium Audio Company, which is itself owned by Gentex Corporation following an acquisition that closed in 2025. That is, 3 ownership changes in 3 years for a brand whose entire consumer reputation was built on decades of stability. Verdict: a genuine mid-market engineering heritage, a well-documented hardware failure that generated real financial consequences for the company, and an ownership structure that has changed twice since the defect first appeared. All 3 of those facts are true at the same time, and none of them cancel the others out. Buy this if you find Onkyo equipment from before 2013 in confirmed working condition, or if you're specifically looking at their 2026 CES lineup once official pricing is confirmed. Avoid it if you're buying a second-hand unit from the 2013 to 2019 window without asking the seller to demonstrate HDMI switching first. If they can't show you a working HDMI signal on the spot, walk away before you hand over any money. That's the first brand on this list. And the crossover from mid-market reputation to a documented hardware failure happened over roughly 6 years. The next brand shares the exact same defect, the exact same parent company, and almost nobody buying it realizes the connection. Integra. Integra exists as Onkyo's custom install sister brand, built for the CEDIA channel rather than retail shelves. And both brands are core products of Premium Audio Company under the same Gentex ownership described a moment ago. Integra's positioning has always leaned toward professional installers rather than direct consumers, and that positioning came with a THX certified engineering reputation that technicians genuinely respected for years. Here's the part almost nobody connects when they're shopping. Integra receivers from the same 2013 to 2019 generation share internal board designs with their Onkyo counterparts, which means they carry the identical HDMI failure risk. A buyer who specifically avoided Onkyo because they'd heard about receiver problems and then bought an Integra instead assuming it was a different, more reliable company, made a decision based on a badge rather than a circuit board. The badge was different, the board was not. Verdict. The same defect, under a different name, sold to buyers who specifically thought they were avoiding it. Buy this if your budget reaches Integra's current DRX series flagship models, which represent genuine custom install engineering investment. Avoid it if you're buying a used unit from the shared defect window, assuming the Integra badge means a different manufacturing process than Onkyo. It doesn't. 2 brands down, 1 shared defect, 1 shared parent company, and neither badge tells you that on its own. The 3rd and 4th brands on this list share a different kind of connection, the exact same new owner, and it happened only last year. Denon. Denon has manufactured audio equipment since 1910, and its professional heritage is real and well documented. Broadcast turntables, studio amplifiers, and equipment specified by Japanese public broadcasting for decades. That reputation was built on specific engineering decisions technicians could verify by opening the chassis, not on marketing copy. Denon spent years under Sound United, which was acquired by Masimo, a medical technology company with zero audio engineering background, in a deal worth over $1 billion in 2022. That ownership period is what most existing reviews and older videos still describe. It's outdated now. In 2025, Masimo sold its entire consumer audio business, Denon included, to Samsung's Harman division, the same company that already owns JBL, Harman Kardon, AKG, and Mark Levinson. That's a second major ownership change in 3 years, and it happened recently enough that most buyers researching Denon today are still reading reviews written under the old ownership structure. Verdict. A century of genuine engineering credibility now managed by the same Harman portfolio that has already reshaped cost structures at JBL and Harman Kardon. The pattern at those brands is the pattern to watch for here. Buy this if your budget reaches Denon's upper AVRX or flagship tier, where component specification still reflects genuine engineering priority. Avoid it if you're buying entry-tier models assuming the professional broadcast heritage carries down to a $500 receiver. The switching power supply inside answers that question before you even connect a speaker. Marantz. Marantz followed Denon through the exact same ownership chain, Sound United to Masimo to Samsung's Harman, because both brands were sold as a package in the same 2025 deal. Marantz was founded in New York in 1953 by Saul Marantz, an engineer who believed the gap between what amplifiers measured and what they actually sounded like was larger than the industry was willing to admit. The Model 7 preamplifier from 1958 became a reference standard for an entire generation of engineers, verified by technicians rather than by a marketing department. What separates Marantz from Denon in this new Harman-owned era is the Cinema series, the receiver line most current buyers actually purchase. The Cinema 50 and 70S models use Class D amplification modules sourced from third-party suppliers rather than designed in-house, a cost decision Harman inherited rather than created. But when it now has to decide whether to continue, verdict. The same founder's philosophy, the same new corporate parent as Denon, and a consumer line facing the same decision Harman has already made at JBL, which cost structure survives the transition. Buy this if your budget reaches the Marantz Model Series integrated amplifiers, which carry more engineering continuity with what Saul Marantz actually built. Avoid it if you're buying the Cinema series assuming the 1958 engineering culture survived 2 ownership changes in 3 years. Open the chassis, and the Class D module will answer that question directly. 3 ownership stories in, and a quick question. Have you ever checked how many times your receiver's parent company has changed hands since you bought it? Most buyers never think to ask, and most product pages will never volunteer the answer. Before the final brand on the avoid side, subscribe now if this kind of ownership chain breakdown is useful to you. The fifth brand didn't lose an ownership battle or a hardware defect. It lost the one thing that used to define it, the gap between its vintage flagship and its current consumer line. Pioneer. Pioneer's professional credibility is specific and genuine. TAD reference amplifiers, broadcast components, equipment trusted by mastering engineers who couldn't afford to get it wrong. The current consumer VSX receiver line shares almost none of it. The amplification stages in entry VSX models use third-party Class D modules that appear across the budget consumer market at this exact price point, and the chassis construction uses thin steel panels that resonate audibly under load, a cost decision, not an acoustic one. The vintage Pioneer SX series tells a completely different story. The SX 1980, the SX 1250, the SX 939. These are receivers technicians still regard as genuine benchmarks. A well-maintained SX 1250 will outperform most current production receivers at twice the price on every measurement that matters for two-channel listening, because it was engineered in an era when the primary competition was acoustic performance rather than feature count on a spec sheet. Verdict. The professional line and the vintage line both earn the Pioneer name honestly. The current consumer VSX line borrows it, and the chassis construction confirms that the moment you tap the top panel. Buy this if you find a vintage Pioneer SX series receiver in confirmed working condition or if your budget reaches the Pioneer Elite series. Avoid it if you're buying current production VSX entry receivers, assuming the TAD or vintage SX heritage carries over. It doesn't, and it never did. 5 brands, 5 different ways an ownership chain, a shared defect, or a widening gap between vintage and current production quietly changed what the badge on the front actually promises. The technicians already know what they buy instead, and neither of the next two needed a billion-dollar acquisition to prove it. Anthem. Anthem operates under the same Canadian corporate family as Paradigm and Martin Logan, a group that has never redirected its engineering priorities toward servicing acquisition debt the way the Harman-owned brands above have. Every Anthem receiver ships with Anthem Room Correction, ARC, a calibration system the company developed and continues to refine rather than license from a third party. The MRX 740, Anthem's mid-tier receiver, retails at $2,899, a figure independent bench testers have confirmed directly rather than sourced from a press release. That price buys a discrete amplification design and a room correction system that measures your actual listening space rather than assuming a showroom demo represents your living room. Verdict. A receiver priced like the premium tier because the engineering inside actually is the premium tier, with a measurable calibration system to prove it rather than just claim it. Buy this if you want room correction that's genuinely engineered rather than a marketing checkbox, and your budget reaches the MRX 740 or above. Avoid it if you need the absolute widest brand recognition in a showroom because Anthem built its reputation on measurement data, not shelf presence. That's the first brand that earns what it charges. The second has been solving the same problem since 1972, and it never needed a billion-dollar parent company to keep solving it. NAD. Electronics was founded in London in 1972 with one governing philosophy: measure what matters, spend the engineering budget on the signal path, and price the product honestly. The 3020 integrated amplifier became the benchmark for an entire generation of listeners on exactly that philosophy, and NAD has been owned by the Lenbrook Group of Canada, alongside sister brands PSB and Blue Sound since 1999, with no acquisition debt reshaping its cost structure in the meantime. The current AVR lineup, including the T758 and T778, along with the Master Series M17 surround processor, carries that philosophy forward through NAD's modular design construction system, which lets components be upgraded individually as formats change rather than replacing the entire unit. That's an engineering decision aimed at the customer's long-term cost, not the company's quarterly margin. Verdict: the same measured, honest pricing philosophy that built the 3020 in 1972, still being applied to receivers in 2026, under an ownership structure that has been stable for over 2 decades. Buy this if you want a receiver built by a company whose engineering priorities haven't been redirected by a corporate acquisition in 25 years. Avoid it if you specifically need the deepest feature count on the market, because NAD prioritizes signal path integrity over checkbox specifications. Here's the principle worth taking from this list. One sentence: an ownership chain that changes twice in 3 years reshapes what's inside the chassis long before it reshapes what's printed on the box. 3 words: documented, stable, verified. The first 5 brands on this list fail at least one of those 3. The last 2 pass all 3, and neither of them needed Gentex or Samsung to explain why. Which one surprised you most, the shared defect or the shared new owner? Drop it below. See you next time.